The lights were hot. That was the first thing Denzel noticed when he walked onto the set of Piers Morgan Uncensored. Not just warm, pressurized, like they were daring him to sweat. But he didn't. He never did. Across from him sat Piers, already smirking, fingers flipping through a stack of cards as if preparing to read charges. The cameras weren't rolling yet, but the tension was. Denzel didn't fidget. He just waited, calm, watching the crew scramble behind the glass. "You good?" the producer mouthed. Denzel gave a small nod. His voice had always been steady. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Piers cleared his throat dramatically. "All right, let's make this count." Rolling in 5. The countdown felt like a challenge. 2, 1. The red light blinked on. Piers faced the camera. "Good evening. Tonight, we're joined by a man known for powerful performances on screen, and now, apparently, off it too. Mr. Denzel Washington, welcome." Denzel met his eyes. "Good to be here." Piers smiled tightly. "You've been quite vocal lately. Activism, justice, politics, are you turning into the next celebrity crusader?" "Depends," Denzel said. "You calling for justice or just calling ratings?" A ripple moved through the crew. Piers leaned forward. "Let me rephrase. When did you decide your voice needed to be part of the national debate?" Denzel didn't blink. "When silence started getting mistaken for consent." Piers chuckled. "So now you speak for America?" "No," Denzel replied. "But I won't let you keep speaking over it." The energy shifted. Not explosive, but electric. Piers tried again. "You're an actor. That's your lane. Why swerve into politics?" Denzel's answer was slow and clear. "Because injustice doesn't stay in one lane. And neither will I." That landed harder than anything loud. And suddenly, the interview wasn't entertainment anymore. Piers gave a thin smile, the kind that hid irritation behind performance. He wasn't used to being outpaced this early. Normally, guests squirmed a bit, tried to keep up, tried to charm. But Denzel wasn't playing defense. He was anchoring. "Let's get specific," Piers said, tapping his cards like they held the truth. "You've criticized the media. You've questioned justice departments. You've even called out both parties. But isn't that just convenient? Standing above it all?" Denzel didn't flinch. Convenient would have been staying quiet and cashing checks. "Oh, come on," Piers said, laughing now. "You're not oppressed. You're elite. You're Hollywood royalty." "And yet," Denzel said, leaning forward slightly, "I still get followed when I walk into a store without a suit on." The audience behind the glass went still again. Not because it was shocking, but because it was true. Too true. Piers tried to steer. "You think your personal experiences justify broad claims about society?" "I think a nation that ignores its uncomfortable truths stays sick," Denzel replied. "And media, yours included, keeps selling the symptoms like it's entertainment." Piers's eyes narrowed. He saw the game changing. "So now you're questioning journalism itself?" Denzel's voice dropped just enough to quiet the room. "I'm questioning whether journalism is still journalism, or just theater with ad breaks." Boom. That line didn't just cut. It echoed. Piers cleared his throat. "We report facts." "No," Denzel said, locking eyes. "You perform sides." The tension had formed now. "Wait." Denzel wasn't raising his voice, but the words landed like thunder. Each line revealed more than it told. Show, don't tell. And Denzel was showing everything. Piers tried to reclaim control. "Let's not get sanctimonious. You're an actor, not an oracle." "And you're a host," Denzel replied. "Not a judge." The studio floor manager looked like she'd stopped breathing. "Is that why you're here?" Piers said finally. "To lecture me?" "No," Denzel said. "I'm here because someone has to say it, and you'd never let anyone else finish the sentence. Silence again. Not emptiness, but weight. The kind that makes people lean forward without realizing. And the red light on the camera stayed on, blinking like a witness. Piers leaned back in his chair, his usual rhythm disrupted. He glanced toward the control room, then back at Denzel, like hoping for backup from behind the glass. But no one dared interrupt what was unfolding. He straightened his posture. Let me ask this. Are you saying platforms like this don't have a place in the conversation? Denzel's reply was cool. They do. But the problem is when the platform becomes louder than the message. You think I'm louder than the message? I think you're louder than most people's ability to hear. It wasn't a jab, it was a mirror. And it stung. People tune in for answers, Mr. Washington, Piers said sharply. They want to know what's right. What's true. And too often, Denzel said, you give them certainty dressed as truth. Volume dressed as value. Piers narrowed his eyes. So what? You've come to fix it? No, Denzel said. I came to remind folks that just because a man has a mic doesn't mean he has insight. That line broke something in the room. Not tension, expectation. The script was gone. Piers pressed harder. Let's talk about your recent speech. You walked into a political summit, mid-event, and delivered a statement that some called disruptive. And others, Denzel said, called necessary. But you weren't invited to speak. I was invited to attend, Denzel clarified. And I spoke because silence has become too comfortable in rooms that need friction. Isn't that just grandstanding? Piers asked. You could have emailed your concerns. Denzel almost smiled. And it would have been deleted before it was read. That's why I showed up. You can't ignore presence like you ignore perspective. There was something about how he spoke. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't hostile. It was deliberate. And that, more than anything, was disarming. Piers crossed his legs. You think people want to be uncomfortable? I think people need to be, Denzel replied. Comfort rarely changes anything. The audience behind the glass leaned in. Phones recorded through the studio window. It wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a shift. Piers lifted a brow. So what is this, then? A performance? Denzel looked him dead in the eye. No. This is a refusal to be edited into someone else's narrative. And just like that, the balance of power tilted again. The silence in the studio wasn't empty, it was loaded. Like everyone was waiting to see if Piers would regain control or if Denzel had just rewritten the entire format. Even the cameraman had paused, unsure whether to zoom in or stay wide. Piers shifted in his chair, forcing a tight smile. You've got your principles, I'll give you that. But some might say you're playing to the crowd, just another public figure chasing applause. Denzel didn't blink. If I wanted applause, I would have picked an easier room. That line didn't just defend, it disarmed. He wasn't asking to be liked. He was asking to be heard. And ironically, in a room built for broadcasting, he was the only one doing it with clarity. People follow you, Piers said. You influence millions. Don't you think that comes with responsibility? Exactly, Denzel replied. That's why I speak the way I do. Not to be followed, but to make people stop and think. Piers chuckled, but it was hollow. You sound rehearsed. I sound prepared, Denzel said, his tone like tempered steel. There's a difference. For a split second, Piers lost his words. Then he grabbed his cue card, trying to pivot. All right, then let's talk solutions. You criticize systems, but what are you building? I'm building awareness, Denzel answered. Conversations that don't end in shouting matches. Rooms where people don't have to raise their voice to matter. You think that's enough? I think it's a start. A rare one. Piers tilted his head. So is that why you walked into that summit uninvited? To build awareness? I walked in, Denzel said, because I was tired of watching people speak for America without listening to America. Boom. The words hit like bricks wrapped in velvet. Piers raised an eyebrow. And what makes you think you represent America? I don't, Denzel said. But I represent a piece of it that doesn't yell, doesn't riot, doesn't trend. Just lives, works, listens, and gets ignored. That shut things down harder than any insult could. Behind the glass, the producer whispered, "We need to break, now." The director shook his head. "Not yet. We've never had numbers spike this fast." Even Piers sensed it. He wasn't driving anymore. He was holding on. The camera zoomed slightly on Denzel's face, not planned, not rehearsed. But perfectly framed. Because this wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning. Piers took a long breath, as if trying to catch up to a conversation he'd started but no longer controlled. His cards sat untouched now, useless props. The rhythm was gone. The format was cracked wide open. He glanced at the camera light. Still on. "You know," he said slowly, "you talk a lot about being heard. But isn't it fair to ask, what exactly are you saying that's so different?" Denzel's answer came without pause. "That we've mistaken noise for message. That we've traded truth for convenience. That we've made outrage a currency." Piers tilted his head. "And you think you're immune to that?" "No," Denzel said. "But I refuse to feed it." That landed hard. The audience, even the tech crew, had stopped blinking. You could feel the attention like a current in the room. "Then what is your message, Denzel?" Piers asked, voice sharp now. "You came here without a movie to promote, without a campaign to push. What is it you want people to hear?" Denzel leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "That decency is not partisan. That compassion doesn't belong to one side. That if your first instinct when someone disagrees with you is to shout them down, you've already lost the point." There it was. Plain. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. "And what about me?" Piers said suddenly. "Do you think I'm the enemy?" Denzel looked at him, really looked. "No," he said. "But I think you've forgotten what this seat was supposed to be. Not a throne. A table. For dialogue." Piers sat back like he'd been tapped on the chest. Not hit, just reminded. "Do you know how many people would love to sit here?" Denzel continued. "And they'd come here shaking, begging to be heard. But the second they speak from the gut, they get cut off, edited, turned into clickbait." "That's not fair," Piers said. But he didn't sound convinced. "Maybe not," Denzel said. "But it's true." The air grew heavier. Piers glanced toward his producer. She didn't move. She knew better than to break what had become the most gripping stretch of live television in months. "I've been on sets my whole life," Denzel said. "But this is the most scripted place I've been." "You're calling me fake?" Piers asked, voice low now. "I'm saying your questions are real, but your expectations are rehearsed." And with that, the whole room exhaled. Like they'd all been holding their breath through a truth they didn't expect, Piers tapped his pen against the desk. A soft click. The only sound for a second. "So what would you do if you were sitting in my chair?" he asked, almost sarcastically. "Interview yourself?" "No," Denzel replied. "I'd listen. And I wouldn't be scared of silence." The comment wasn't hostile. It was surgical. Piers leaned forward. "You think silence makes good television?" "I think silence makes honest moments. And those are rare. That shut things down more than any loud argument could." The audience behind the glass had stopped reacting altogether. They were locked in, as if afraid to interrupt whatever this was becoming. Piers shifted again, trying to take the lead back. "You know, people are saying what you did at that summit was political theater." Denzel nodded. That's funny. Because most of what happens in those rooms already is theater. I just didn't stick to the script. You ambushed the event. I told the truth. You disrupted a sitting president's address. I offered something he wasn't giving, a pause. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't righteous. It was just, centered. And that made it dangerous. Piers squinted. You're very good at making a moment feel bigger than it is. No, Denzel said. I just stop pretending the moment is smaller than it is. That line hit the back wall of the studio and bounced right back into Piers' chair. You're doing it again, Piers muttered. Doing what? Shifting the story without raising your voice. Denzel raised an eyebrow. That's what stories should do. The camera slowly pushed in. Denzel didn't move. No grin. No smirk. Just presence. Piers sighed. You realize people will twist this, right? Turn it into something you didn't mean. They always do, Denzel said. But meaning lasts longer than spin. Behind the camera, a floor assistant mouthed, "This is gold." And it was. Denzel didn't storm out. He didn't interrupt. He didn't humiliate. He simply sat there and broke a formula no one realized was fragile, until now. For a beat too long, Piers just sat still, blinking. He reached for his water but didn't drink. His mouth was dry, but the problem wasn't thirst, it was control. He had lost it. What do you want people to do with this moment? He asked, voice lower now. I don't want them to do anything, Denzel replied. I want them to feel something. That's the only way change starts. Piers let that sink in. Feel what exactly? Regret? Guilt? No. Awareness, Denzel said. Most people aren't cruel. They're just asleep. And nobody wakes up by being yelled at. They wake up when something shakes them quiet. It was the kind of line that would be misquoted, clipped, and turned into a dozen Instagram captions, but the room heard it as it was meant. What shook you? Piers asked, genuinely curious now. Denzel hesitated for the first time. He looked off stage for half a second. Losing my father, he said. The silence in that hospital room. No crowds, no applause. Just questions I hadn't asked and time I couldn't get back. Even Piers leaned back. I realized then, Denzel continued, that most of our days are just noise. And we confuse that with living. So I stopped chasing noise. I started listening instead. Piers said nothing. It was the most human moment of the entire program. Behind the glass, the control room was quiet. The viewership numbers were skyrocketing, but no one dared cut to commercial. And when I walked into that summit, Denzel added, I wasn't looking to go viral. I was looking to interrupt the noise long enough for people to hear something real. Piers looked down, then up again. Do you think you succeeded? Denzel shrugged gently. The fact that we're sitting here, like this, having this conversation. I'd say yes. A beat of silence. Then, unexpectedly, Piers asked, do you ever get tired? Every day, Denzel said, smiling for the first time. But I rest in truth. It holds. The camera stayed locked on the two men. No flashy graphics, no dramatic zooms. Just a still frame, Denzel steady, Piers subdued, and something raw floating in the air. Piers cleared his throat. Some say you're positioning yourself for politics. A campaign, maybe. Is that what this is? Denzel almost laughed. I've played politicians. That's enough acting for one lifetime. But you're gaining traction, Piers pressed. The public's listening to you now. I hope they're listening to each other, Denzel said. I'm just a mirror. Piers leaned back, unsure how to steer anymore. Then what's next? I keep showing up, Denzel answered. Quietly. Consistently. Until the room doesn't need volume to feel something. In the control room, the producer whispered, "This is the cleanest chaos I've ever seen." Piers straightened in his chair, squaring his shoulders. "All right," he said, tone shifting. "Last question." Denzel waited. "If you had the entire country's attention for 60 seconds, no interruptions, no edits, what would you say?" The pause was deliberate. Not for drama, but for clarity. Denzel's eyes locked on the lens. "I'd say we've spent too long trying to win arguments and too little time understanding people. I'd say being right doesn't mean you're righteous. I'd say love your neighbor, even when they vote differently. Especially then." He sat still for a second longer. "And I'd say if your identity depends on someone else losing theirs, you don't have an identity. You have a costume." Piers blinked. "That your final word?" he asked. "No," Denzel said. "It's my opening line." The red light on the main camera flickered off. End of segment. No applause. No outro music. Just silence, and 1,000 thoughts born from it. Piers looked over at his crew, but no one moved. Even the floor manager looked stunned. Denzel reached for the mic on his collar and unpinned it slowly, like finishing a conversation with gravity, not ego. He stood up, nodded once to Piers, and walked off the set. Not a showman's exit. A man who knew words weren't weapons, they were instruments. And tonight, he'd played the room like a violin. Backstage, the atmosphere was frozen. No one knew whether to celebrate, panic, or rewind the feed just to be sure what had happened. Piers removed his mic and stared at the monitor replaying the final seconds. No music. No outro. Just Denzel's closing line ringing louder in its quiet than any soundbite. One of the junior producers broke the silence. "We need to cut a promo, now." The lead producer, still glued to the screen, replied, "That was the promo." Out in the hallway, Denzel didn't rush. He greeted the sound tech with a gentle nod, paused to thank a security guard, then stepped into the green room where Ruben, his press manager, was already fielding calls. MSNBC wants a reaction piece. CNN's prepping a morning segment. Fox just replayed the final clip without commentary, Ruben reported without looking up. "You shifted something again." Denzel poured himself a glass of water. "I didn't shift it," he said. "The moment did. I just didn't get in the way." Meanwhile, across the internet, clips were already being shared. But this time, it wasn't outrage fueling the views, it was awe. Comments flooded in. "Didn't expect to cry on a news segment." "Piers got wrecked without a single insult." "This is how you shift culture, quietly, sharply." But not everyone was impressed. A known political strategist tweeted, "Denzel's too polished to be spontaneous. This was rehearsed. Controlled." To which someone else replied, "And yet, it worked. Maybe we need more control and less chaos." In a cafe in Minneapolis, a barista paused mid-shift to replay the moment again on her phone. In a living room in Atlanta, a Vietnam vet told his grandson, "That's how you carry your voice. With purpose, not volume." Back at the studio, Piers sat alone in his dressing room. His phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from friends, critics, execs. One read, "He outclassed you. But he didn't humiliate you." That's rare. Piers sighed. He wasn't angry. Just unsettled. And he knew what unsettled him most, the truth had landed without shouting. That meant people had no defense against it. He looked at his reflection and whispered, "I just got reminded what this seat can be." 2 days after the interview aired, Denzel sat in a modest church in south-central LA, tucked into the back pew. No cameras. No crew. Just him and the silence he often spoke about. The pastor's sermon wasn't about politics or media. It was about humility. And as he spoke, more than a few congregants looked toward the back, not out of recognition, but reverence. Denzel didn't stand out. He blended in, the same way his words had blended truth into a place usually reserved for conflict. Meanwhile, the clip from Piers Morgan's show had reached 45 million views across platforms. Not because Denzel had shouted, or attacked, or staged a viral stunt, but because he'd sat, spoken, and left space for people to actually hear. In classrooms, teachers were replaying parts of the segment for students during media literacy lessons. In editorial rooms, writers debated whether Denzel had redefined what political discourse meant. Even within Trump's own circles, there was a shift in tone. One campaign advisor anonymously admitted, "It's hard to fight a man who didn't raise his voice." Piers returned to air that Friday night. Same set, same suit, but not the same posture. He opened with a rare statement. "Earlier this week, we aired an interview that was supposed to be combative. It became something else. Denzel Washington reminded me, and maybe all of us, that the loudest voice isn't always the one that wins. Sometimes, it's just the one that speaks last and means it." Backstage, Rubin turned to Denzel with a grin. "You didn't just win a moment. You built a benchmark." Denzel didn't smile back. "I'm not here to win," he said. "I'm here to wake people up, and not with noise, but with clarity." That night, he posted a single sentence on social media. "If a man speaks with peace and the world listens, maybe peace was never the problem." No hashtags. No retweets. Just a statement left hanging in digital air. It went viral anyway. Because maybe, just maybe, people were finally tired of shouting. And maybe, the stillness was starting to speak louder than ever. You don't need to scream to shift the world. Denzel proved it. If this moment made you feel something, like, share, and subscribe. Because this is what real storytelling sounds like. Quiet. Clear. Unshakable.